It was a crisp morning when I walked into the office, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the clatter of keyboards greeting me like a daily ritual. But today something felt different. As I passed by my coworkers, I could sense an unease in the air. They were avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed tones, and I couldn't help but wonder if something had changed, if I had missed the signs. I pushed open the door to my boss's office, Brad Harrington, the CEO of the company. He looked up from his desk, his usual cocky smirk nowhere to be found. Instead he looked uneasy. Something was off and I could feel it in my gut. "Marie," he said, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. "Have a seat. We need to talk." I sat down, trying to mask the confusion rising in me. I had been with the company for years, long enough to have built up a reputation for being reliable, resourceful, and maybe even a little too good at my job. But I had learned over time that being good at what you do doesn't always earn you loyalty. "Brad," I said calmly, "what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting to the papers in front of him. "Marie, we've been evaluating the direction of the company," he began, avoiding my gaze. "And, well, we've decided to go in a different direction. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated." I blinked, not quite processing the words. My mind raced. "What do you mean, eliminated?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been with this company for 5 years. I've given everything I have to make this place succeed." Brad gave me a tight smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "I know, Marie, and you've done a great job. But, unfortunately, this is just the way things go sometimes. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" I had poured my time, my energy, and my talent into this company. I had stayed late countless nights, fixed problems that no one else could, and made sacrifices without expecting a thank you. And now, after all of that, Brad was telling me I was dispensable. I was being discarded like a worn-out piece of equipment. "I've also arranged for your severance package," he continued, pushing a folder across the desk toward me. 3 months' pay, and you can keep your health benefits through the end of the year." 3 months. That was all he thought I was worth? I could feel the fire burning inside me, but I kept it under control. "I see," I said, my voice low and steady. "And I'm supposed to just walk out the door with my head down and be thankful for the scraps you're offering?" Brad raised his hands, almost as if to placate me. "Look, Marie, I'm just doing my job. The company has to keep moving forward. And you, well, you'll find something else. You're talented. You'll be fine." That was it. That was the moment when I realized Brad wasn't just firing me. He was dismissing everything I had ever done for the company. He was making a choice to throw me away. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I stood up slowly, taking a deep breath. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let him see me broken. Instead, I walked out of his office, my mind already racing with thoughts of what came next. I walked out of the building that morning, feeling a strange mixture of anger and clarity. The cool wind hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, but the sting didn't match the fire burning inside me. I had been fired without cause, without any real explanation. And while the world around me continued, oblivious to the injustice I had just suffered, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I didn't let myself react too quickly. I took the rest of the day off to think, to gather my thoughts. I didn't want to be impulsive. I knew the first thing I had to do was protect myself. That meant securing the severance package Brad had so generously offered me, making sure the paperwork was solid, and then moving on to what I really cared about: the company I had helped build. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the contract Brad had given me. 3 months' pay, a few benefits, all in exchange for everything I had done for them, for everything I had sacrificed. I flipped through the pages of the contract, but my mind wasn't on the terms. It was on something far more important. I had made Brad and the company a lot of money. I had put my blood, sweat, and tears into every project. And now it was time to make sure I got my share. The next morning, I started making calls. The first person I reached out to was an old colleague, Ben, who had worked alongside me for years before moving on to a financial firm. Ben had always been sharp, and I knew he could help me in ways Brad never could. "Ben, it's Marie," I said as soon as he picked up. "I need your help with something. It's a bit of a delicate matter, but I need to make sure I get what's rightfully mine." He didn't hesitate. "Tell me what's going on." I explained the situation, how I had been let go, how Brad had taken credit for my work, and how now the company was my only concern. "Marie," Ben said after a long pause, "if what you're saying is true, then you're not just owed a severance package. You're owed a lot more. You've been part of this company's rise for so long, and now it's time to collect. You're entitled to those shares and I can help you get them. I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making Brad pay. It was about taking control of what had always belonged to me, my stake in the company. We're going to need to move quickly, Ben continued. I'll help you with the legal side, but you need to have everything lined up. Financials, contracts, proof of your involvement in the key decisions that shaped this company. I'll get to work on my end, but you need to gather your documents. We'll go public with this if we have to. I agreed, hanging up the phone with a newfound sense of purpose. The next few weeks were a blur. I contacted lawyers, gathered every document I could find, and dug through the company's financial records to prove just how integral I had been to its success. Every deal, every project I had worked on, each one was evidence that Brad and the others owed me more than they would ever admit. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized how far Brad had gone to cover up the truth. The board, the investors, they had all been complicit in his lie. They had let him take the credit for everything while I had stayed in the shadows, working tirelessly behind the scenes. But that wasn't going to happen anymore. I wasn't going to be a ghost anymore. The next step was crucial. I needed leverage, something that would make them listen. If I couldn't get it through legal channels, I would get it through the one thing they cared about most: profits. I called Ben again. It's time, I said, my voice steady. I'm ready to make my move. Good, Ben replied. I've been working on the financials. It's all set up. We'll go in hard. But I'll warn you, it won't be easy. You're going to be facing Brad's people, the board. They're not going to give in without a fight. I'm not asking for their permission, I said, my words firm. I'm taking what's mine. The plan was set. It wasn't just about taking back what I was owed anymore. It was about making sure that Brad and the rest of them would never forget who had built the company from the ground up. They had stolen from me, taken credit for my hard work, and now I was going to take it all back, along with a piece of their profits. I met Ben at his office the next morning. The legal documents were stacked neatly on the conference table, a small stack of evidence, each page a testament to the years I had spent silently building this empire. Ben's office was sleek, modern, but there was a calm intensity in the air. He was ready for war. We're going to send them a message they won't forget, Ben said, leaning over the table, his finger tapping a folder in front of him. I've got everything we need. The question is, how far do you want to push this? I knew what he was asking. He wasn't just talking about taking back shares or compensation. He was asking if I wanted to go after the entire company. If I wanted to take it all, the assets, the stock options, and possibly even control. The thought flickered in my mind, but I wasn't looking to burn the place down. Not yet, anyway. I was going to take the high road. For now, I said, let's focus on securing my stake. We can deal with Brad later. I want to make sure my investment pays off and the rest will follow. Ben nodded, his expression serious. You've got it. I'll take care of the legal side. All you need to do is make sure you're ready to make the announcement. When this hits, the board won't have a choice but to listen. We spent the next few hours going over the details, making sure everything was in place. The plan was airtight. I had evidence of the decisions I had made, the behind-the-scenes work I had done, and the fact that my shares should never have been undervalued in the first place. It wasn't just about the shares themselves, it was about the principle. They had used me, and now it was time for me to use what was mine. Brad's days of hiding behind the company's success were over. By the end of the day, everything was set. Ben had arranged for an official meeting with the board, and the media would be there. I wasn't going to let Brad handle this behind closed doors. He thought he could dismiss me like I was nothing, but I had the power now. And I wasn't afraid to use it. The next morning, I dressed carefully, business casual but sharp. I wasn't here to look like the victim. I was here to look like the future of the company. I wasn't walking into that boardroom with my head down. I was walking in with my head high, ready to claim what was rightfully mine. When I walked into the boardroom, all eyes turned to me. Brad sat at the head of the table, his jaw clenched as he tried to maintain his composure. The board members looked uneasy, their eyes darting between him and me. It was clear they didn't know what to expect. I walked to the center of the room, my eyes locked on Brad's. He didn't have that smug look on his face anymore. Now he looked almost worried. Good. You should be. Marie, Brad said through gritted teeth, what is this about? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a seat at the table. The room fell silent. I opened the folder in front of me, pulling out the documents that proved everything. The financials, the shareholder records, my contracts, all the evidence that showed I was owed far more than I had been given. I've come to discuss my shares, I said, my voice steady but cutting through the silence like a blade. I've made my contributions, Brad. You've taken credit for my work for far too long, and now it's time to set things right. Brad opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing him. You're going to get your moment to explain yourself, Brad. But for now, I think the board should hear from me. I've helped build this company, and it's time I get the recognition and compensation I deserve. I slid the documents across the table. These are the facts. I am entitled to my shares, and I'm not leaving here without them. The board members flipped through the papers, their expressions shifting from confusion to realization. They knew the truth now. They had seen how hard I had worked, how much I had contributed to the company's growth. They knew Brad had lied, manipulated, and taken advantage of my efforts. Brad, I said, turning toward him, you have until the end of the day to come to terms with this. I'm not here to make enemies, but I will not be silenced. I will make sure my voice is heard, and I will make sure my stake in this company is recognized. The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke, no one moved. But I could see it in their eyes. The power had shifted. Brad's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing. He knew this was it. He had underestimated me, and now he was going to have to face the consequences. The room felt suffocatingly silent as Brad looked over the documents. His hands were shaking, his eyes flickering with disbelief and frustration. He hadn't expected me to come at him like this. He had probably thought I'd walk away, take the severance, and disappear. But I wasn't going anywhere. As the board members continued to read, I could see the tide turning. The tension in the room was palpable, the balance of power shifting away from Brad's direction. The smug aura he had carried for years was cracking, bit by bit, like an old wall crumbling under pressure. Finally, one of the board members, Carla, who had always been distant, spoke up. Brad, is this true? Are these documents legitimate? Brad hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as though he were searching for the right words. He began, but the words failed him. Carla's question had already cut through his defenses. They're legitimate, I interjected, my voice cutting through the uncertainty in the air. These documents prove my involvement in every key decision that built this company. And if you look closely, you'll see that I've been underpaid and undervalued for years. Carla, to her credit, didn't waste any time. She looked up from the papers and met Brad's gaze, her face hardening. Brad, I think it's clear that you've been taking credit for someone else's work. You should have been more transparent about Marie's contributions. The room was now looking at him, every member of the board evaluating him in a new light. They were no longer just Brad's colleagues. They were witnesses to his dishonesty. The room began to shift, the tide moving firmly in my direction. I had done the research, had everything lined up. I knew the company's financials inside and out. What Brad had thought was a simple game of power was quickly turning into a game of accountability. I'll take my shares now, Brad, I said, cutting the silence with finality. You've had your chance. You failed, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. The board, the investors, the media, everyone will know who really built this company. Brad opened his mouth, his eyes now darting around the room as though searching for someone to side with him, but no one spoke. His allies had evaporated. The betrayal was too obvious. They had all seen how he manipulated the system, and now they were seeing the consequences of his actions. He looked at the papers again, his hand gripping the table. You can't do this, Marie. You can't just take control like this. The company's success is mine alone. I met his gaze, a steady calm in my voice. You're wrong. The company's success is built on the hard work of every employee, and I was a key part of that. You used me to get ahead, but now I'm taking back what's mine. Carla was the first to speak again, her tone firm. Brad, you've been informed. We have no choice but to comply. It's clear now what needs to be done. The rest of the board members nodded slowly, some with regret, others with resignation. But all of them were aligned in the same direction now. They knew who had been the driving force behind the company's growth, and it wasn't Brad. It was me. Brad looked around the room one last time, his face darkening with anger. He had no power left. The tables had turned completely, and I was sitting at the head of them now. You'll regret this, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't worried about regret. I had the power now. I had the shares, the legal backing, and the truth on my side. I don't think I will, Brad. I think you're the one who's going to regret everything you've done. I turned to the board, my tone softening but my resolve unshaken. Let's get the paperwork in order. I'll be taking over the management of this company now. We'll begin restructuring immediately. No more delays. As the board nodded in agreement, I knew it was only a matter of time before the company was fully mine. Brad's reign was over, and he would soon realize that no amount of manipulation or power could change that. The shares, the control, everything, I had it all now. The next few days were a whirlwind. The news of Brad's fall from grace spread like wildfire. It wasn't just the employees who were talking. Investors, clients, and the media were all in on the drama. I hadn't expected the speed at which things were changing, but it was clear that this wasn't just a corporate reshuffling. This was a full-on transformation of the company's future. I spent the next 72 hours in meetings. Investors wanted answers, the media wanted a statement, and my new team needed direction. I gave them all what they wanted, but I did it on my terms. I didn't need to apologize for Brad's mistakes. I didn't need to justify my actions. I just needed to make sure everyone understood one thing. The company had a new leader, and that leader was me. I was exhausted, but I couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. There was still too much to do, too much to prove. Then came the next surprise. It wasn't Brad who was causing trouble this time. It was the investors, those same people who had once showered Brad with praise, the ones who had backed him up when I was in the trenches making the company work. Now they wanted to meet with me face to face, to discuss the future of the company. I wasn't afraid, but I knew I had to be smart. They were the ones holding the keys to the company's future. If I didn't convince them, if I couldn't get them on my side, then the work I had done would be for nothing. I arranged for the meeting at the company's headquarters. This time, I wasn't just walking into a room of people who didn't know me. This was my chance to prove that I wasn't just an interim leader. I was the future of this company. When I entered the boardroom, the investors were already seated, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. I knew why they were here. They didn't know if I was a sure thing. I wasn't Brad. They had supported him, trusted him, and now they were questioning everything. Marie, the lead investor, Robert Haskell, said as I walked in. I'll cut to the chase. The company is in transition. You've made some bold moves, but we need to know. Why should we trust you to lead the company moving forward? I didn't flinch. This wasn't my first rodeo. I'd been questioned before, but this time felt different. This time it wasn't just about me. It was about securing the company's future, and, ultimately, my own. I understand your concerns, I began, my voice calm but firm. But let me make something clear. This company didn't get where it is today by following outdated leadership or holding on to the status quo. It got here because of innovation, hard work, and most importantly, vision. Brad lost sight of that vision. I'm here to bring it back. Robert raised an eyebrow as if challenging me to go deeper. I took a breath and continued. Under my leadership, we'll focus on what truly matters: growth, expansion, and efficiency. We've been stagnant for too long. You all know that. I've spent years seeing the potential in this company, and now I'm going to make sure we capitalize on it. I paused, letting the silence fill the room before I added, the company is worth more than the board has realized. But it's up to us to unlock that potential. With the right leadership, the right strategies, and the right vision, this company will become a market leader once again. The investors exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly turning into cautious optimism. They hadn't expected this much conviction from me. I could see it in their eyes, they were starting to come around. But there was still one final hurdle. We're willing to give you a chance, Robert said after a moment, but we need to see the plan. We need to see the numbers, the projections, and a clear roadmap. If we're going to move forward with you as the CEO, we need to know you can deliver. Consider it done, I said, not even flinching at the challenge. I'll have a detailed plan on your desks by the end of the week. A plan that will not only secure the company's future but ensure we become leaders in our field. The room was quiet for a moment as the investors processed my words. I could tell they were still weighing their options, but they were slowly coming around. One by one they nodded in agreement. You've got our attention, Marie, Robert said. Let's see what you've got. With that, the meeting ended. I walked out of that room with a renewed sense of purpose. I had done what I came to do. I had not only taken control of the company but also secured the backing of the investors. Now it was time to put my plan into motion. The real work was about to begin. The following weeks were a blur of action, decisions, and relentless drive. I dove into the company's operations with a level of precision and focus that no one had seen from Brad. The transition had been swift, but it was time to deliver on my promises. I wasn't just going to restore the company to its former glory, I was going to make it better. I focused on restructuring, cutting unnecessary costs, and implementing a new, aggressive marketing strategy. The sales numbers, which had once stagnated, began to climb again. Employees who had once felt invisible under Brad's rule now felt heard and valued. I had earned their trust. Now it was time to earn the trust of our customers and the investors. As the weeks went on, I noticed something odd. A subtle undercurrent of resistance still lingered in some corners of the company. There were employees who had once thrived under Brad's rule, and now they were hesitant about the changes I was making. They didn't see my vision. They didn't understand why I was shaking things up so quickly. But I wasn't here to play politics. I was here to make things happen. And for that, I needed everyone on board. One afternoon, I called a company-wide meeting. The room filled with employees, some excited for the future, others still unsure about the direction I was taking. It was my chance to address the elephant in the room. There was silence for a moment, and then a few hesitant nods. I could feel the tension easing, but I knew this wasn't enough. I needed them to feel like they were a part of the change, not just the recipients of it. I want you all to understand something, I continued, my voice steady. You are the reason this company is where it is. Every late night, every meeting, every project you've worked on, that is what built this company. I'm here to help us grow, to help us succeed together. But I need you to trust me. I need you to trust the direction I'm leading us in. At that, something shifted. The room's energy started to change. It wasn't immediate, but the tension began to lift. People were starting to see the vision. They were beginning to believe in what I was doing. In the days that followed, I started to see a change in the office. People began collaborating more openly. Ideas flowed more freely. The resistance I had felt was slowly melting away. It wasn't just my leadership style that was changing the company, it was the way people were starting to believe in themselves again. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still obstacles ahead. As much as I had secured the trust of my team and the investors, there were still external challenges to face. Brad had left the company, but he hadn't left the industry. Word on the street was that he was quietly trying to start a competing business, something that could threaten the work I was doing. I wasn't worried. I had already anticipated this move. Brad didn't understand the first thing about building a lasting business. He understood how to make quick profits, but he had no real vision. He didn't know how to create something sustainable. And that, I realized, was where my true power lay. I had the patience to build something that would stand the test of time. Brad, on the other hand, was already starting to make rash decisions. I wasn't going to fight him head-on, yet. But I knew that in time he would make mistakes. And when he did, I would be there ready to pick up the pieces. I had already turned the company around. Now, I was ready to make sure it stayed that way. Brad could compete all he wanted, but I was going to stay focused on what mattered. Growing the company, building our market share, and making sure everyone in the business knew they had a part to play in our success. The next few months saw our stock prices climb. The investors who had once doubted me were now calling me with congratulations. The board was behind me completely. I had proven myself. But what really made it all worth it was seeing the company I had once helped build, the company I had once been discarded from, finally begin to thrive again. It wasn't just about the money or the power. It was about the satisfaction of knowing I had done what Brad never could. I had built a company that would stand strong, with or without the people who tried to take credit for it. And I wasn't done yet. As the months passed, I could feel the weight of my decisions, but I also felt the exhilaration of watching everything come together. The company was no longer just a job, it was a testament to everything I had worked for. Every success felt like a victory over the time I had spent under Brad's leadership. Every deal closed was a step further away from the past, and every day I felt more in control. But just when things seemed to be running smoothly, I got a call that made my heart skip a beat. It was from one of the senior investors, Stephen Ward. I'd worked with Stephen for years and had always respected him, but this call wasn't a casual check-in. His voice was tight, and there was an urgency in it that I hadn't heard before. "Marie, we need to talk," Stephen said, his tone serious. "It's about Brad." I felt my stomach twist. Brad? After everything that had happened? I couldn't believe it. "What about him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the growing unease in my chest. "He's making waves," Stephen continued. "He's starting a new venture, something that's got investors on edge. People are whispering, and it looks like he's trying to make moves that could undermine the stability you've worked so hard to build." I was quiet for a moment, letting his words sink in. I had expected Brad to be bitter, but I hadn't thought he would go this far. "What kind of moves?" I asked, my mind racing. "He's got some big investors backing him and he's moving fast. He's targeting the same market we're in, and there's talk that he's planning to buy up key competitors, consolidate his position, and start a bidding war. If he does it right, he could corner the market." The realization hit me like a cold splash of water. Brad wasn't just playing small ball. He was going after everything I had worked for. And he wasn't going to stop until he had taken control of it. "I don't care about his little startup," I said, trying to steady my thoughts. "We've got a stronger foundation now. We're not going anywhere." Stephen paused as though considering my words. "That's true, Marie. But you need to be prepared. If he starts gaining traction, he could become a serious threat." I didn't need any more convincing. Brad had underestimated me before, but this time, I wasn't going to wait for him to make the first move. I had learned from the past, I wasn't going to let him silently tear down everything I had worked for. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice now calm but with an edge of finality. "Let him make his moves. I'll make sure we're ready." The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and phone calls. I called in the top financial analysts, my legal team, and the marketing experts. We needed to get ahead of Brad's plans. I wasn't about to let him come in and sweep everything away. We had built something strong, and now I was going to make sure that strength would crush his ambitions. I wasn't afraid of competition. In fact, I welcomed it. But this wasn't just about competing in the market. This was about protecting everything I had built, everything that was mine. I wasn't going to let Brad's ambition ruin everything. I spent hours looking over Brad's new venture. His strategy, his investors, his business plans. I had expected him to come at me with something underhanded, but what I found was far more dangerous. Brad wasn't just trying to take control of the company. He was looking to disrupt the entire market, creating a ripple effect that could leave my company vulnerable. I needed to act quickly. We were going to beat him at his own game. I spent the next few weeks making moves quietly, deliberately. I restructured our deals with key partners, securing exclusivity clauses that would keep Brad from swooping in and making offers. I reached out to our competitors, formed new alliances, and pushed for joint ventures that would give us an even larger share of the market. I also doubled down on innovation. I wasn't just going to defend my position, I was going to advance. We started rolling out new products, expanding our services, and making sure that we were ahead of the curve. Brad's moves had shaken me, but they had also lit a fire inside me. If he wanted to play dirty, then I would show him just how high the stakes were. But there was one last move I had to make, the final checkmate. Brad hadn't realized it yet, but he had already walked into my trap. All the moves I had made in the past weeks? They were calculated to lead him right where I wanted him. I reached out to one of my contacts, someone from the inside who had been with Brad's new venture since its inception. I needed to make sure that when Brad tried to make his big move, I would be ready to counter it with a force he couldn't possibly match. I had the right people, the right deals, and the right strategy to crush him. The stage was set. Brad had played his hand, and now I was going to make sure he paid the price. He thought he could build something better than me, something stronger, something more profitable. But what he didn't realize was that he was just a pawn in my game, and I was about to checkmate him for good. The days that followed felt like a high-stakes chess match, each move I made designed to trap Brad in a corner he couldn't escape. The more I thought about his comeback attempt, the more I realized that I wasn't just fighting him for control of the company anymore. This was personal. He had taken something from me, and now it was time for him to learn that you don't mess with people who have the power to take it all back. The final confrontation was looming, but I had everything in place. I'd executed my strategy, securing key deals, reinforcing our market dominance, and cutting off the avenues Brad thought he could use to undermine me. The groundwork was solid. But now I needed to make sure that when Brad moved, it would be his final mistake. It was a Friday afternoon when I got the call. Brad had launched his first big move, an aggressive acquisition offer for one of our biggest competitors. I wasn't surprised. It was exactly the kind of move I had expected him to make, bold, brash, and a direct challenge to my control. But this time I wasn't going to let it slide. I called my team together, Ben, Carla, and the head of acquisitions. We couldn't afford to waste any time. I knew that Brad's offer was just a front. He was trying to destabilize the market, get the board to question my leadership once again. He was making a play for control. And it was time for me to put an end to it. "We're going to shut him down before he even realizes what's happening," I said, my voice steady. "I want a counteroffer ready in 2 hours. We're going to offer them something Brad can't match. It's time we put the final nail in his coffin." The team worked quickly, putting together a deal that would not only stop Brad's acquisition in its tracks but also offer the competitors something far more valuable: exclusive access to a partnership that would give them an edge in the market. It was a masterstroke. I was using Brad's own tactics against him, and it felt damn good. I sent the offer to the competitors' board, making sure they knew exactly what was at stake. This wasn't just about buying another company. This was about securing the future, mine and theirs, and ensuring that Brad's plan was nothing more than a failed bid for power. As the hours ticked by, I waited. I wasn't nervous, I knew the deal would go through. But I also knew that Brad wouldn't give up so easily. He was too stubborn, too proud to walk away. And that was his fatal flaw. It was around midnight when I got the response. The competitors' board had accepted the offer. They were pulling out of the deal with Brad and going with mine instead. I couldn't help but smile. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Brad had been played. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the situation lift from my shoulders. Brad would have to answer to the board now. He would have to explain why his deal had fallen apart while mine had solidified our future. It wasn't just a business victory, it was the final step in reclaiming everything I had ever worked for. But the final blow came when I saw the message from my legal team. Brad's new venture, the one he had worked so hard to get off the ground, was now facing a lawsuit. His investors were pulling out. His company was crumbling under the weight of his failed attempts at sabotage. He had played his cards, but he hadn't seen the bigger picture. And now the consequences were coming home to roost. The media picked up the story the next morning, headlines blaring about Brad's failed venture, his crumbling empire, and the rise of my company. The story was everywhere. The investors who had once believed in Brad were now scrambling to save face. And as for Brad? He was left with nothing but the remnants of his arrogance. I sat in my office, staring at the news as it unfolded on the screen in front of me. The world was finally seeing the truth. Brad's empire of lies had come crashing down, while mine was just beginning to rise. I wasn't just a survivor in this game, I was the one who had taken control. I had outplayed Brad at every turn, used his mistakes against him, and built something stronger, something better. And now, I was going to see my company grow to heights Brad could only dream of. As I looked out the window at the skyline, the city stretching before me, I realized one thing. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about me, Marie Thompson, the one who had built everything, who had been pushed aside and fired, and who had come back to claim what was hers. I wasn't just going to play the game. I was going to change it.